Michael stood across the street, arms folded, as two deputies handed his ex-wife an eviction notice for a house she thought was hers. Tracy screamed, "You can't do this!" Then she looked up and saw him. Her face froze in disbelief. The man she stole everything from had just taken it all back. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. When Michael Carter stepped off the military flight into the cutting wind of Ohio in November, he carried nothing but a duffel bag, a funeral suit, and the hollow ache of grief. His father, a quiet man who had once taught him how to tie a fishing knot and salute without flinching, was buried 3 hours earlier under slate skies. But it wasn't the loss of his father that unsettled him the most. It was the absence of her. Tracy hadn't answered his last 3 calls, or his last 7 texts. The last message he'd received 2.5 weeks ago had been a photo of the dog asleep on the couch with the words, "Miss you both. Stay safe." That was before the silence began to stretch. Not like a rope, but like a crack in drywall. Slow and quiet until one day you blink and realize the whole wall has split open. The airport was supposed to be the place of solace. He'd imagined her standing there, coat buttoned high, eyes welling as she rushed to him. But there was no sign of Tracy. No calls, no apologies, just voicemail. His mother drove him home from the funeral, but after 15 minutes of awkward silence, he asked her to drop him off at the house. The townhome was locked. The key under the planter was gone. He circled around and pried open the back window with a shovel from the shed, like a stranger breaking into his own life. The house was bare in a way that didn't scream panic or robbery. It was surgical. The framed photos had been taken down with care. The closet hangers were empty but not disturbed. Even the Wi-Fi password sheet had been peeled off the fridge. It was as though she had packed not only her belongings, but the entire presence of their marriage. It wasn't until his gas card was declined at the corner station that he felt the weight in his chest tighten into something denser. On instinct, he borrowed the clerk's laptop and logged into their joint bank account. 3,087s. He refreshed the page 3 times, as if the numbers might glitch in reverse. Gone. Deployment pay, savings, emergency reserves, all gone. There was no goodbye letter, no voicemail, not even a scribbled "I'm sorry" on a napkin. Just silence. And a man standing in his own home, staring at the ghost of a life that had been erased while he was halfway across the world, saluting a flag he thought he was fighting for, when the real war had already begun back home. Michael hadn't cried since his father's funeral. Even then, it was a single tear behind dark lenses, unnoticed as taps echoed off the casket. But now, seated across from a disinterested officer scribbling in a notepad, he realized how little space the system had for emotional wreckage. The report was taken, reluctantly, like a formality someone would misfile by Tuesday. "She's an adult, sir. Looks like she left voluntarily." Voluntarily. The word landed like a punch beneath his ribs. As if this was reasonable, normal even. As if a woman disappearing with $46,000 and a decade of shared history was a simple choice, not a surgical betrayal. Back at base, the desert hadn't changed, but Michael had. His rifle felt heavier. His thoughts wandered. His body stood in formation while his mind walked through rooms stripped of memory. His appetite vanished. Even his sleep, something hard-earned and sacred in the military, dissolved into shallow flickers of rest interrupted by sharp awakenings and the deafening sound of silence. No gunfire, no orders, just Tracy's absence, echoing in his skull like a ricochet. The major saw it coming before he did. "Carter, you're off the field until further notice. Sort out your affairs. You're not at war out there anymore. You're bleeding on this side now." Michael didn't argue. He didn't salute with the same conviction either. He returned to the townhome and stood in the doorway longer than necessary, like the drywall might say something if he waited long enough. Then he started searching. Not for her, but for why. The house had been emptied with surgical precision, but one thing escaped her sweep. A narrow, white envelope wedged behind the water heater. It was sealed with clear tape, methodical, almost respectful. Inside, a printed bank statement, neatly folded, and a yellow sticky note, written in her familiar round, hesitant handwriting. "You'll find someone better. You always do. I just couldn't be part of this anymore." No name, no apology. Just a vanishing act cloaked in faux mercy. The statement showed repeated wire transfers to an unfamiliar name, Rick Delgado. Michael didn't recognize it, but the name sounded too clean to be innocent. He ran a background check that night, cross-referencing what little he found on public databases. High school, Facebook, bankruptcy, arrest in 2008, a flame she'd never put out. Michael stared at the screen, unblinking. Not sadness, not rage, resolve. Pain had shaped the perimeter of his grief. Now it carved room for calculation. Michael sat across from the financial crimes attorney like a man preparing for a different kind of war. His voice was flat, each sentence delivered with military precision. He wasn't there for sympathy. He came for a target assessment. He laid out documents, printed emails, bank statements, withdrawal logs. The lawyer nodded, occasionally raising a brow, until Michael pointed to the retirement account transaction. Her signature, forged, sloppily at that. "That's your leverage," the attorney said, tapping the paper. "Joint accounts are a legal gray area. This is criminal fraud." That changed the terrain. Suddenly, Tracy wasn't just a vanishing spouse. She was a felon. Michael filed the civil suit first, to freeze assets. Then came the criminal complaint. But even that wasn't enough. Fines? Jail time? That would make her a martyr in her own mind. He didn't want justice that arrived in a courtroom. He wanted her to feel the weight she had so easily shoved onto him. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd detonated trust, dignity, and time he couldn't recover. So he adjusted his strategy. Michael reached out to someone he trusted, Gunnar, a digital forensics specialist with a clearance level high enough to break things most people didn't even know existed. They didn't talk details. Michael only needed one thing: a location. 3 days later, Gunnar sent coordinates. Rick Delgado, it turned out, was living under someone else's name in a leased cabin north of Sedona, Arizona. Remote, secluded, no visible employment, but active on Facebook, too active. Michael didn't confront them. That would have been too simple, too satisfying in the short term. Instead, he built a trap. He created a fake online persona, a real estate investor with deep pockets and a casual attitude toward background checks. He sent Rick a message about leasing the property, offering a 6-month cash advance. Rick, predictably greedy, took the bait. Within a week, they signed an agreement. The moment Rick clicked accept, Michael assumed full legal control of the lease. At 7:48 a.m. the next morning, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up to the cabin. 2 officers served an official eviction notice. Tracy stumbled onto the porch, barefoot, shouting, "There must be some mistake." "There isn't," the deputy replied. And across the street, leaning against the hood of a rental car with arms folded and eyes unreadable, stood Michael, watching, silent, not a word, not a smirk, just a presence, undeniable, immovable, and impossibly calm. She had vanished without a word. Now, so would he. The courtroom smelled of paper and fluorescent fatigue. Civil Division 3C. Not the place where heroes are made, but where truth gets hammered into record. Michael sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, uniform crisp, jaw tight. He didn't flinch as the judge leafed through exhibits. Bank statements marked in red, notarized affidavits, screenshots of forged digital signatures. He didn't glance at Tracy, seated 3 chairs down, dressed in muted tones that couldn't mute what she'd done. Her attorney stammered through closing remarks, trying to reframe the story as emotional strain, impulsive mistakes. But the evidence didn't whisper, it screamed. The forged access to his military pension fund alone carried the weight of a felony. The transfer trail was surgical, damning in its precision. When the gavel dropped, the ruling was swift and without ceremony. The court froze her assets, including the secret secondary account. Michael was awarded 85% of the marital property. Not out of pity, but because the facts warranted it. Tracy didn't cry. She didn't speak. She gathered her things with a mechanical stillness, like a figure carved from regret and empty justifications. Rick Delgado, for his part, had evaporated. No forwarding address, no legal appearance. Just vanished. Fitting for someone who had never stood for anything. His absence spoke volumes. Months passed. Dust settled. The war inside Michael had dulled from fire to embers. He kept moving. That was the only way it made sense now. Forward. Always forward. When the re-enlistment came, he accepted it without hesitation. No deployments this time. The Army offered him a domestic role, one built on mentorship, training new recruits, instilling structure where chaos once lived. A different kind of battlefield, but one he was finally ready for. The local news station showed up on Veterans Day, looking for a story with a ribbon around it. They found Michael at sunrise, standing in uniform beside a flagpole, the lines of wear carved into his face like scars in oak. The reporter smiled politely and asked the usual question, "What keeps you going?" He didn't pause, didn't blink. "Sometimes you fight for your country. Sometimes you fight for yourself. Either way, you don't stop until the job is done." The segment aired that night, and by morning, it had gone viral. Somewhere, Tracy might have watched it. Maybe she recognized his voice before she saw his face. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. Michael hadn't just survived the betrayal. He had outlived it.